Isn't it go? Oh, here it goes. It's slow. All right. Otto Cole, and I'm here with Andy Nowicki. And so we're going to talk about 80s pop culture. Uh, since it might not be too much longer on this planet to discuss it, we just all may go up in a mushroom cloud. So that was a theme of a lot of 80s culture as well, but more ordered, mutually assured destruction between the U.S. and the Soviet Union. Well, I think we'll probably start out with music. And so I think a couple of the 80s acts that we've kind of discussed, Rick Springfield, Duran Duran. I guess we could start with those. So, yeah, let's talk about Springfield. He's still touring in his 60s and in much better shape than guys that were hits in the 60s. Hello? I'm not getting Andy. Hello? Andy? Yeah. I'm to have lost him. Let's try this again. Are you there, Andy? I don't know why I'm not hearing him. Let me try moving him and then adding him back in. All right. Hello? Why am I not hearing him? Oh. All right, I have two of you.
Yeah, I logged in again.
All right, let me move one of you.
Can you get rid of the one of me?
Well, I'm trying to. All right, is it better now? No, it's echoing.
I don't know why it's making that echo sound. I don't know why I got kicked off, or I don't know what happened just now.
Oh, let me see. Let me try this. Can you hear me?
Yes. There's
still
an echo.
Yeah, can you have one of your Andys leave the studio? Maybe that will help.
Okay, I'll see what I can do. Hang on.
Have the. All right. Does that help? No, I'm not hearing you.
I'm still here.
Oh, okay, I hear you now. All right.
Okay.
I think the echo is gone.
Yes, sounds like it is.
It wouldn't be a Gen X show without technical problems, though.
I guess so. I guess yeah. Like we're like getting a little old for this technology stuff. I've always been a little old for this technology stuff. I've never really caught into it myself.
Really, but you liked. But 80s culture was all about cutting edge technology.
It was there. Well, that's the paradox. There you have one of the paradoxes, I guess, of the whole thing. But what the last thing you said before I got cut off was you talked about how Rick Springfield was touring, and I said, and you'd mentioned Duran Duran also, and I said,
I'm not hearing you now, Andy. Hello, Andy. Oh, is it? Why is this not working? Hello? Oh, I don't know why I can't hear Andy now. Uh, all right, Andy, I can't hear you. All right, let's see what's happening here. Edit mic setting. Hello?
"Oh,
All right, I'm not hearing you. Oh, this is not. What happened here?
hello,
Yeah, I can hear you now.
okay." I'm trying to. I don't know if this is going to make any difference, but I'm shifting locations.
Oh, you,
Can you hear me now?
I can.
Okay.
Yeah, that's good. All right. Yeah, we've got
Okay.
80s technology, evidently.
I don't know. So I'm away from the location that I was before, where I had Wi-Fi, but the Wi-Fi is maybe somewhat dodgy there. So that was maybe what was happening. Although I was always hearing you.
Well, are you
It
sure
was
you're
just.
in Georgia, U.S.? Are you sure you're not in former Soviet Georgia? Was this technology?
I think I'm in the United States of America, but who knows? Who knows anymore? Maybe I'm in the virtual world that what's his name created.
Well, I'm
Maybe I'm
almost
in
in
the Matrix.
Mexico, and my internet works better than yours.
You're in New Mexico, right?
Yes, but not too far from Old Mexico. About 150 miles north of the border.
Okay. So what's it like there? Out of
Uh,
curiosity.
where I'm at,
Yeah.
there's nothing. There's not much here. This town was created basically so that people who lived in the surrounding potash mines would have a place to live. And now it's for a couple other industries, most notably what's called WIP, which
Uh
is
huh.
It's Department of Energy facility for nuclear waste.
You're telling me you live around nuclear waste?
Not too far from the largest nuclear waste facility in the United States.
Oh my gosh. Is it contained?
Supposedly.
That's what they tell you anyway. Well, I bet it's a good place to find cheap, like housing for cheap anyway.
You would be surprised. Housing actually is hard to find here because, in addition to, it's like the only town for those two industries, and then there's also nearby oil and gas. So we're like the westernmost part of the Permian Basin and then in the east is Odessa and Midland and Texas.
Okay. So it's still, I'm just like what something I've been wondering about lately is where can you go to actually, live like, like where can you go that's actually affordable to live, to buy land, to buy a house, or to rent an apartment? Like where do you where can you live and not be bankrupted? It just seems like that's getting
And it's
less and
getting harder and harder. I don't know. Problem is, of course, if you have a PhD in history, the answer is nowhere on the planet.
mm, mm. Why is that? Why, if you have a PhD? Oh, because it's hard to find a job. You mean?
Yeah, it's hard to find any job that pays anything.
Yeah, right.
I mean,
Well,
I
this seems.
have a full time job, but it's not paying a whole lot. I mean, I'm squeaking by.
Yeah, yeah. I know what you mean. I hear what you're saying.
Um,
Um,
it, and if it weren't for the fact that I get the insurance, I'm not even sure it'd be worth it to work for the money. But
right. I get you. So you're not the globe-trotting um, academic anymore. You've given that up.
those jobs have all dried up. I'm hoping maybe now that the war in Ukraine is ending, maybe Russia will start inviting us back, and
Uh huh.
which would be ideal for me if I could get a job in uh, the Russian Federation. But I'm not sure.
Yeah. Well, that's something interesting to maybe talk about. I know we want to talk about '80s nostalgia because the world's ending, but that at least something optimistic to hang your hat on, that maybe that it seems that reading the tea leaves, the
I
Ukraine
have
conflict is ending soon.
well, I think the conflict in Ukraine is going to end. Whether that will lead to Russia allowing or inviting in foreign academics from the U.S. anymore, I don't know, and whether that would lead to me being able to find a position in the Russia, uh, I don't know either. And for a while, there was openings in Tumen in Western Siberia and Moscow, but they all dried up the day that Putin intervened in Ukraine. Hello, where'd you go, Andy?
Hello.
Yeah, you were cut off there for it seemed for a second.
Okay, still happening.
Yeah.
Well, what I was asking was is it possible that we can go from DEFCON? Which of the DEFCON is which DEFCON is the highest? Which one is the highest danger? Is it 1 or 5?
I think it's
I forget.
5. I think the higher you go,
Okay,
the worse.
okay, and I only know about that because of the '80s movie War Games, of course. But if Ukraine, if there's going to be peace in Ukraine, can we go from a DEFCON 4.5 to maybe scale it back to maybe DEFCON 3.7?
Okay, it's the other way around. DEFCON 1 is the highest.
Okay.
All right,
Well,
the Cuban
my
Missile
question.
Crisis got up to DEFCON 2, and 9/11 was DEFCON 3.
Right. So where do you reckon it's at right now?
Uh, 5, or it was at 5, maybe 4, but I think it's probably. I think we're getting less danger. At this
That's
point,
what well,
the Russians have won everything they wanted, and the United States has basically said it's not going to support Ukraine anymore. I mean,
yeah,
we're phasing out the aid, but the Ukrainians seem to have run out of young men to send into the grinder. So I mean, there's
yeah,
not much. I mean, but this was kind of inevitable. Russia had 3 times as many people as Ukraine to begin with.
yeah. But of course, people were wondering if there was if there was going to eventually be like like that they'd be if Western powers would be sending in troops and ground troops and other stuff instead of just weapons and whatever. But that seems to be not the case. They're talking about peace now, so I
Yes.
guess that's not the case. Um,
Yeah, because we can't afford to give unlimited funding to both Ukraine and Israel. So the Israeli lobby has
uh,
got ahead of
is
the queue on that.
yeah, yes. So I know you want to talk about '80s stuff, and I
Yeah,
don't
well,
want to.
we can talk about '80s stuff, and of course there was a lot of great '80s music out of the Soviet Union, which some of it's still around. So we have people like Kino, Sector Gaza,
Oh
um,
yeah,
Aurora. Yeah.
I'm
Um,
not familiar with Soviet rock. Do they have
yeah, well,
everything? Were they
when they went to Glasnost, right? So they freed up a lot of the censorship. There was this
right?
huge wave of bands that came out, and some of them are still listened to. I don't know if any are still active because, like all the best rock bands, the lead singers tended to die in drunken car accidents or drink until their liver blew up or those type of
Right.
things.
Yeah, and I guess that's more of a danger even in Russia than elsewhere. Um,
Well, I mean, the lead singer of Sector Gaza died of a stroke that was brought on by liver disease from heavy drinking, and he wasn't very old. I think he was in his early 30s.
hmm. I'm thinking now of the band that like this techno band that has the song about the rain. It became this big sensation. They showed this video of them performing like in 1987. Um, there's one guy on a keyboard who.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's a very famous. I think that's what the band is called, Aurora.
Oh,
And
okay, that's Aurora. Okay, because that song rocks. I like that song. I mean that's pretty hypnotic synth pop right there.
well, let's see if I can find exactly.
Yeah, I think if you type Russian New
Well, there is
Wave
a
or
band
Russian.
called Aurora, but I'm not sure if it's the same one. Yeah, I know the song you're talking about. That was a very famous uh, video clip from a Soviet television show during
Yeah, it
Glasnost.
got it got famous in the last few years. Like people, people started to notice it in the West, and it was kind of a funny video because they're performing their hearts out, and the fan the studio audience are all just kind of sitting there, and I guess that's kind of a cultural thing, but it's like, yeah, nobody's really was really swaying to the music or rocking out in the studio as they were playing. But maybe like that was sort of an Eastern European, Russian, I don't know, Doomer Slavic aesthetic or something. Um, uh,
Yeah, okay, here it
really?
is. Allianz is the name of the band, and
Mhm.
the song is Nazara, which is Russian for at dawn. And the clip
At
you were
dawn,
thinking about was filmed in 1987, so in the early
right?
period of Glasnost. The band had
Yes.
formed in 1981. Yeah, so there's a fat guy on the keyboard, yeah.
Yeah. He looks like he looks like 20 years older than the other guys in the band. Like
Yeah.
it's pretty funny. Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
Allianz.
So they were doing like their version of a sound that had grown popular in the West, and I guess that was like part of what was happening in the '80s was the West was where it's at as far as like culture.
In part, but I mean, the way it gets interpreted in places like Russia or Japan, uh, or even China, is very distinctive. It was much less homogenized back then than it is today in terms of global culture. You there? I have two Andys here. One of these work? Does that work? Hello? I don't know what's wrong. It's on Andy's side. For some reason, it's not working here. Hello? Why is this not working? All right, well, this may have been a technological failure.
Hey, hello.
Oh, you're here, back.
I keep going back to SteamYard and hitting the link again. But I don't know what's going on. I don't know why this. I'm hearing you constantly.
Yeah, well, you're now like three Andys.
I'm not really there because I'm not hearing an echo right now.
Well, because I've only put one on the stage. The other two I have in back.
Yeah. The reason why I do that, I've been doing that is because I don't know what else to do. Like I'm trying to get back on, trying to get operational again.
Okay. All right. Oh, yeah. Well, so Allianz was the 1987 Nazara.
Right. So I'm wondering. I was trying to ask the question. Like in the '80s, do you think there was more goodwill towards Western popular culture in general, and where as opposed to today, where the West it's maybe shot its wad, and people and like it's gone off the deep end, and all this stuff is being promoted that people are just like people
Yeah,
in
I think so.
third world.
Especially if you're talking about the U.S. and in the case of the Soviet Union, they'd been kind of sealed off. I mean, not completely, but a lot of uh, cultural contact with the United States was limited because the Soviet government thought it would politically be problematic.
Yes.
So there was a lot of demand for it by the populace when Gorbachev finally lifted the restrictions. And I think there was also a lot of goodwill towards the American people and kind of a recognition that the Cold War had been between governments and not people. And I don't
Right.
think that exists anymore. I think it's now like they've seen decades of a unipolar
Yeah.
hegemonic America impose uh, bad things, and it's quite
Yeah.
obvious that this is being done through. It's not just being decreed. There's like some sort of. They're going through the stages of getting it legitimized by the democratic process. So I think there's in places in the former Soviet Union and the Middle East, other places I've lived, I don't think they're as open or as pro American cultures as you would have seen. So I mean, in '87, you have basically the beginning of the end of the Soviet Union, but you also have uh, basically the beginning of the end of the Cold War. That is,
Hmm.
relations between the U.S. and Soviet government are improving, but as they improve, relations on the bottom up are improving much faster because, as I said, they've been restricted for so long. There was a demand in Russia and other parts of the Soviet Union for a greater cultural exchange.
Right. Um, can you hear me still?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Um, yeah, and it's just it's tragic that's all been squandered. Like there was I think maybe in the '80s when Glasnost happened, the Western popular culture symbolized like a lot of things like glamour and glitz and like capitalism and what have you, but it also just represented freedom to a lot of people, and today I don't think that's the case. Today people in those parts of the world think of America, and they more think of perversion and tyranny, and the perversion of and perverse tyranny and tyrannical perversion. Like it's like everything that maybe was good and to be appreciated about the West and the as seen represented by the products of Western culture, whether it's fashion or music or movies or that's all. It seems like that's all been lost, and it seems like
Yeah, well, I mean, I think what you had was, as I said, because of the restrictions of the Soviet government, a large part of the Russian population was open to uh, ex- having much greater cultural contact with the United States. And now they've seen the crap we produced for the last 30 years, and they're like, you know what? Our own stuff is better. You know what?
yeah, we're good.
We I mean, it's not that they ever thought their own stuff was bad, but they were willing to have kind of a cosmopolitan approach, to
Yeah,
adopting various cultural aspects from the U.S. And that's really soured because we basically the U.S. government kind of took control over it completely, and what they were imposing was. It was no longer, here's some nice American band to listen to, some Rick Springfield,
yeah. Wasn't
and here's the McDonald's Big Mac. Now it's like, would you like to see the latest gay porn?
right. Do you want us to make your sons, into girls and your girls into whores? I mean, that's
Right,
basically
and so like that's like a reaction, like so it's like, you know what, the the guys in the under the czar that wanted to have no contact with the rest of the planet, and we just have strict Russian Orthodox rules. That they were right. Just shut the rest of
yeah.
the world off.
Well, as a historian, what do you, as a historian yourself, what would you say? How would you say? Why has it gone this way? Has it been by design? Has it been by I don't know, by
Yeah, I
accident?
think so. No, I think it's by design. I don't. It seemed to me, in one sense, the American elite, but particularly the kind of economic wing of the military-industrial complex, they need to have enemies. So if like the enemy disappears, like the Soviet Union collapses, and the people living there say, "Oh, you know what? We're cool with America. Come on, set up some McDonald's and some rock concerts, and we'll send our fat guy on keyboard to go tour U.S. Maybe, right?"
Yeah,
Right. Well, then they need something else because, like, what are you gonna do? You're gonna have a make weapons to kill the fat guy? What's wrong with you?
yeah,
And I see this in the Middle East too. You know, of all the people in the Middle East, the people that were most pro-American are the Kurds, and I lived among them for 3 years. And
right.
yet, I saw the U.S. government, with also with its allies in Europe, but U.S. taking the lead,
Yes,
spend huge amounts of money to promote radical feminism and LGBTQ and other things
yeah,
that were just totally incompatible with
yeah,
the Islamic base of their culture, even though, as far as Muslims are concerned, they're quite liberal and open. But I mean, you can't like openly be promoting sodomy and think that
yeah,
that's not going to piss people off.
yeah. I just wonder what the reason was that, like, I'm always trying to think about, the why things are happening the way they're happening. I know sometimes things just happen a
Yeah,
certain
well, they
way because,
certainly blew it with regards to the post-Soviet states, particularly Russia, which is the central and most powerful one, and that they were perfectly willing to, be partners in peace and friends after the Soviet Union collapsed, and then we did everything to make their life miserable economically and
yeah,
to try and contain them and to make them into an enemy when they wanted to have peace. So I mean that's largely on the U.S. government.
it's just the neocons and neoliberals in who are behind
Well, in part,
the
I mean, I think also, the military-industrial complex they need enemies to make money.
right.
But yeah, there's all kinds of factions in the U.S. I think that just were scared to death of peace. A real peace was not going to benefit them, but of course, it would have benefited the people of Russia and the United States.
Yeah. And going back to the '80s stuff, I mean, the '80s stuff was actually fun. It's like you go back and listen to those songs, watch those videos, and what have you. I mean, there's not so much of pushing of any kind of agenda as it is just like hedonism in a non perverse sense, like just like
Well, there was
uh,
some of that. I mean, but yeah,
I mean, yeah, there was still decadence. Yeah, I mean, it's rock and roll. Of course, there's decadence and depravity and all that, but but
but usually there was like some controversy if it was blatant.
yeah,
So most of what you get in the top 40 stuff is, right. You get this. It's I don't want to say perhaps the word veiled. I mean, they don't need to come out and be explicit. So I mean, we'll go back to Jesse's Girl and Rick Springfield. It's obvious that
yeah,
that song, a lot of it is talking about sex, but they don't need to like be a graphic description of it.
yeah. Well, it's about wanting, like, it's about having the hots for someone who's with your best friend. It's sort of it's a relatable dilemma.
Right, but I mean, compare that day to I don't know a song like WAP, where you're
Yeah, I know.
describing biology. It's not
Yeah,
one is more in line with typical Western depictions of these things, where you don't need to spell it out because everybody knows, right?
absolutely.
So, so
Yeah, I
you can
mean,
be more artistic in kind of taking a more traditional way of describing these things.
yeah, and you can sell sex and sex appeal and like all that without being without being obscene or perverse or like it can just be like I don't know. It can be restrained, and it's like strange to think
Well,
because in the
actually, a
'80s,
lot of times artists do their best when they're restrained. So, uh, in film, two of the
it's
countries
true.
that produce a lot of great film are countries where there is a censorship regime, and that's Iran and Cuba. And so the whole point of these movies is like, how can we make our point and get it across from the censors, right? Because if
Yeah,
we make it too blatant, if we're not like nuanced and subtle about it, they're just gonna axe the movie. It's not gonna be released because, and we may even go to jail for being, you know,
yeah,
uh,
absolutely.
right. So you get these very good movies from these places that have authoritarian regimes because the whole point is, I need to get around the censorship. So I've got to make the movie complex enough that the censors are not smart enough to figure out what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, and I think it's paradoxical right now in the West. Uh, because there is censorship in the West now. Maybe not state censorship necessarily, but
Well,
there's
state censorship by proxy. It functions the
state.
same.
Yeah. So there's a similar challenge to artists like I don't know if you're an author like me, if you're a writer, if you're a musician or somebody who just doesn't who's dissident who has differing ideas than the woke politically correct mandates. You kind of have to find a way to be true to yourself, or to be true to your ideas, and like slip by the censors.
Right,
So
and that's like, and that's why Iranian film kind of broke out of just being in the Persian language world because people from outside of Iran and the Iranian diaspora, who first among people who obviously knew the language Persian, but even later, just people that were studying film realized, hey, the whole point of an Iranian film is how do I make it past the censorship bureau and still have
mhm,
an important and entertaining film.
that's right. Yeah, and I mean I'm not pro censorship or anything. I'm very much anti censorship, but I do understand how censors
Do
can
you ever
present it.
read Jim Thompson, the writer from the 50s and 60s? They made some movies in the 80s about his books, and most notably The Grifters.
No.
Well, anyway, Jim Thompson pretty much established the modern noir in America concept of the psycho killer with the Killer Inside Me. It was written in the early 1950s. It's
Mm-hmm.
about a psycho killer, a serial killer who's a sheriff in a small town in Texas. But the
Mm.
biography of Jim Thompson, which is in itself fascinating, says that when the late 60s came around and they removed all the restrictions on saying whatever you wanted in writing, right? People could write whatever they
Yeah.
want about sex and violence. And you start
Right.
moving into the 70s, people start writing about incest and whatnot. It
Yeah.
destroyed Jim Thompson because his whole thing was, how can I like portray really creepy people, people
Yeah.
that have serious problems, drug addicts, alcoholics, and in
Yeah.
fact, even the grifters. The whole one of the whole thing underlying themes is that you think there's an incestuous relationship between the mother and the son who are doing the grift, but it's never said anywhere explicitly, right? It's just hinted at.
Right.
And so his whole thing was, how do I hint at this? You know, like the old Hitchcock movies, right? You don't see the knife actually plunge into her in Psycho. You see
Yeah.
it coming down in the shadow, not the actual knife, and then you see I think they used chocolate syrup for the blood.
Right, because it was black and white, so they
Right.
didn't have red. Yeah. Yeah, and it's interesting. And I just got finished reading Patricia Highsmith's novel, The Talented Mr. Ripley. Have you ever read that?
No, should I?
Yeah. I think it was really good.
You know what novel I just started, and I've only read the introduction talking about it, and it's already fascinated me because it ties in with current events. Is because I bought it for $3.30 at where I work. John le Carre's Little Drummer Girl.
Oh yeah. What's that about?
It's about a Palestinian quote unquote terrorist being hunted down by Israeli assassins.
Oh, okay. And John le Carre didn't he write a lot of spy thrillers? Wasn't
Yeah,
that his thing?
his the famous ones he wrote was Smiley's People, and so
Yeah.
and it's a great book because at the end of the third book in the trilogy, right? Because
Mm.
you've been led to support the British MI6 this whole time under Smiley.
Right.
The way the
Right.
British, he finally beats Carla in the KGB. It's so underhanded and evil. You're like, fuck it, I'm supporting the Russians now. The Soviets were right.
That's interesting. Well, The
Because
Talented Mr.
I
Ripley.
don't want to give it away, but Carla walks across the Berlin Wall, and Smiley asked him, "Don't you love your country?" And he says, "I do love my country, but I love my daughter more." And that's the
Mm,
end of the book.
I see.
Whereas
Well,
Smiley never loved anybody, so I mean,
yeah,
Carla's ahead.
that's interesting. So there's moral ambiguity, which is always interesting. Like
Well,
the
no, it's almost as if, all right, the Soviet guy is bad, but
hmm
he has at least some basic moral principles he won't compromise on. And the British guys, they have no principles whatsoever. Their whole
right,
thing is just to win. So they
yeah,
throw every principle to the wind to win, and they do win because the Soviet guy is unwilling to break his principles.
and that seems to be the case right now. I mean, when we look at the world stage right now, it does seem to be the pro-West NATO types and like these globalist groups like the WEF and like they seem to be the psychopaths, who don't uh, who don't seem to have any humanity.
Yeah, well, I think
So
part of that is, the Soviet Union, the revolution was never complete. They never are. But one of the things that happened is you still had kind of an underlying traditional Russia in the center of the Soviet state, and
mhm,
so a lot of these KGB guys were like, they're Soviet patriots because they're Russian
yeah,
patriots, and the Marxism, Leninism is kind of just the it's just the aesthetics of it, the sickle and the hammer and the picture of Marx and Lenin, but
yeah,
to them it's still Mother Russia.
right, Right.
And
That's
I think
understood.
that's kind of what was going on in Le Carre's Smiley's people, although it's down to even more basic values. It's basically Smiley doesn't value the nuclear family, whereas Carla does.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it's prophetic in as far as what's going on right now in with Gaza and Israel and Hamas and so
Well,
forth.
that's what the Little Drummer Girl. I haven't. I mean, I just bought it a couple days ago. I've just started reading it. So, the first part where he goes the introduction, where he talks about how he managed to get all these interviews with different Palestinian figures, including Yasser Arafat.
Mhm.
And it was interesting. Then he says, "Well, I'm not going to go into to my research on the other side in Israel because it was kind of just really boring. It's just like you do in England. You look up a phone number, call it, they make an appointment,
Right.
and you ring the doorbell, and they
Yeah.
frisk you, but then you talk to them." He says, "You never knew if you were actually going to meet one of the Palestinian guys. They might show up, they might not show up, they might take you
Right.
some weird place, they might tell you to go some weird place, and you might not find them."
Right. They might blindfold you and take you
Well, they
somewhere.
do that. He talked about he stayed at the Commodore Hotel, which I've also stayed in Beirut, and they
Mm.
get these cars to take him to see Yasser Arafat, but they have to keep switching cars, and of course it's the blindfolds because they don't want to know during the Lebanese Civil War where the head of the PLO was hanging out.
Right. Yeah. Makes sense. Yeah. Well, the talented Mr. Ripley is a like is about a man who's sort of a grifter, sort of a has no family and just sort of skates by like scamming people, but he has this hunger, this desire for human connection because he was an orphan. He was raised by some distant family member who was not very nice to him growing up. So he gets he just finds himself in the middle of things. He has a way of like conning. Like he's this again morally ambiguous kind of person that you kind of like and cheer for. Well, even at the same time he's definitely morally stunted in a lot of significant ways. And what's interesting about the novel is it strongly hints that he's homosexual. But because this was written in the 50s, they you couldn't just be explicit with that kind of thing.
Unless
So
you were who was the guy? Burroughs, the beatnik. He wrote Queer around that time, and that was pretty
okay, yeah,
explicit.
but that probably was like really like fringe and probably got banned in a lot of places, I'm guessing.
Yeah, well, Burroughs wrote two decent books, and the rest are incomprehensible because he was wasted on drugs. But Junkie and Queer, the prose is quite clear, but both of them are quite explicit. One drug use, and the other homosexuality.
Okay. Yeah, I've seen the movie Naked Lunch. Is the
No,
book's
Naked
not worth
Lunch is
reading?
when he was already strung out in Morocco. So he'd
Okay.
send back pages, and then the pages got dropped. So and there's no numbering on them, and no way to tell them because they're just incomprehensible. So
Really?
Ginsberg and Kerouac messed up the order already, but Burroughs didn't remember what the order was anyway, so like it made any difference.
Crazy. Yeah, the movie is pretty weird.
Yeah, that
It's
was the Cronenberg, wasn't it?
yes. I mean, it was good. It was compelling, I thought, but it was
Well, don't try and
definitely
read the book. It's
okay.
incomprehensible. If you want to read William Burroughs' book, the best one is Junkie, which basically talks
Hmm.
about how he became a heroin addict. So it's not particularly enlightening, but it's very it's pretty good on the description, I think, and it
Right,
is a coherent narrative, unlike many of his later books.
right. Well, the Patricia Highsmith, like the talented Mr. Ripley, I think not written for quite like the fringe audience that like the Beatniks wrote for. So but it's like the restraint that she has to exercise makes it a better read than it would be
Right,
today.
like if you were writing in the Islamic Republic of Iran, you can't mention any
Yeah,
homosexual activity, or the book doesn't
yeah,
get published, and maybe you go to jail.
yeah. I mean, it's not quite as radical as that. I mean, the America in the '50s wasn't
Right,
like
right, right.
modern Iran, but it's still
You
it's
probably wouldn't
all
get a
the things.
lot of good reviews, and you might have trouble even finding a publisher
Yeah, yeah.
if you had those types of scenes in it. Yes, I understand.
So that's like a way of seeing this current I mean, I'm always trying to, I guess, look on the bright side of like not just be gloomy and pessimistic all the time. And it's hard. It's really hard today.
Well,
But
there were some interesting books that come out of the '80s. So the cyberpunk begins there with William Gibson's Neuromancer, which
Mhm.
kind of predicted the internet way back in the early '80s, how it would play out to some extent.
Yeah,
And then
I've never, yeah.
the last novel, well, not at the last, but one of the last completed novels of Philip K. Dick, uh, A Scanner Darkly, which takes place in
Mhm.
Orange County, is about uh, a guy who's so far into the drugs that he's basically spying on himself as a police agent, but he doesn't realize it's himself he's spying on. But
That
kind of
sounds trippy.
the whole background and infrastructure of this is that the people who go to drug rehab are used by the government to grow the drug, to sell, to get more addicts, to get more labor, to make more drugs.
Yeah, that sounds pretty cool. Like that sounds like a. I remember seeing the movie, uh I can't remember his name right now. The director, um, this sort of indie director, once indie director. Now he's much more mainstream. The one who did Slacker and Dazed and Confused, and I can't think of his name.
Linklater.
Yeah, Linklater's did a movie version of A
Yeah,
Scanner
I never saw
Darkly.
the movie version, but I remember when I was living in Orange County High School, reading that book and being fascinated by it.
Mhm.
Particularly Philip K. Dick and his paranoia, I think, calling out correctly. The government
Yeah,
creates problems so that it can benefit from them financially, right? So the government
yeah,
distributes drugs so that it can get drug addicts into its rehab program, where they
yeah,
will get rehabilitated by the labor of growing the drugs.
yeah. Plus, drugs are a huge moneymaker. I mean, that's why the
Yeah, I mean,
CIA.
it's
I'm
not
sure.
like, there isn't a history of the CIA, with opium in Laos and
Yeah,
Thailand and the Golden
yeah.
Triangle, and the earlier
Afghanistan.
support of the remnants of Chiang Kai-shek's Kuomintang and Burma that were growing opium. And of course, in Afghanistan, it was a
Yeah,
big crop.
yeah. Absolutely. Um, yeah, well, I'll have to check that one out. Um, yeah, but back to the '80s. Like, what do you think they thought of like I don't know, Boy George
I
in
was
the
never a big fan. I got that album as a gift, though, actually, from a cousin of mine.
was it a joke or
Culture Club. No, no, she gave it. This was during the. She gave it to me seriously, but I
uh
mean, I kind of feel bad for, I guess, this sage named Boy George, because he had such a horrible heroin problem. Basically,
so I've heard.
ruined it, what would have been his successful years, as far as
Yeah,
uh,
he
a
was very
pop culture
talented.
icon. But he was,
Yeah,
again, like, strung out on some
right.
serious smack.
Yeah, that's I've heard about that too. I just wondered, like in the Soviet Union, like little things like that maybe. I mean, Boy George was even though he was outrageous for the time, he was nowhere near like the kind of
Yeah, well,
Uh,
there were some bands in the '80s that were more explicit. I'm thinking Frankie Goes to Hollywood in particular, and they were actually popular.
yeah,
Uh, but they were probably as far as you could go in that direction.
yeah. And they were
Uh,
banned. I remember their song was actually banned. Their song "Relax" was actually banned on the BBC back in the 80s.
it doesn't surprise me. But
Yeah,
they weren't ever banned in commercial radio in the U.S. But
yeah,
obviously, that would be the kind of most extreme of openly gay music, I suppose,
yeah.
in the '80s. And the opposite would be, I guess, Judas Priest with Robert Halford, who refused to leave the closet because he thought it would hurt the band's
Right.
image and their sales.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Even though he kind of had a thing for bondage, right? That was sort of like
Yeah,
a
I mean, Hellbent for Leather is kind of like he's taking the piss out of his own fans because they're refusing to believe that I mean, where do you think all that leather spikes and stuff? It came from a fetish shop in Soho, which is the red light
right.
district. But the red light district in London, it's like two layers. So the first layer is like the prostitutes, right? But then because it was kind of I want to say a marginal area, fringe area culturally, right? That's when you had all the gay bars open up there.
Mm, right. But it was still, yeah, it was still sort of a fringe or a slightly underground thing back then,
But yeah,
unlike
yeah.
today.
I mean, obviously, if Rob Halford had come out in the early '80s when they released "Screaming for Vengeance" and said that he was as gay as Elton John, it probably would have hurt their sales.
I remember when Elton John didn't seem that gay. It sounds strange to say it now, but I remember,
I think he
like
toned down a lot of it, particularly in the '80s, because he was for the
in
same
the
reason. It just
70s.
he was going for a mass popular base. So
Right.
uh,
He was always flamboyant, but I like I don't remember like
I mean, even Liberace never like came out and said he was gay, even though it was quite obvious to everybody.
yeah, yeah, right. Would
Uh,
have been gratuitous almost.
so that, I mean, and I suppose if we were to look at like culture in the '80s compared to today, there's a lot of we don't need to say it explicitly, right? You're smart enough to figure it out.
Yeah. And also, well, that there was that, and also there was a thing like androgyny was. I remember it was
Yeah, but a lot of
androgyny
that
was.
was by straight guys.
Yeah, it was exactly. I mean, it was like there was this whole androgynous thing, but it was like don't just assume I'm gay just because I'm androgynous. It was which you would never hear today. Like you would it would always it would if anybody is androgynous today, the assumption is, oh, you must be gay. But in a way, in the 80s, people were
No,
more open
probably worse
minded.
would be that they're trans. I mean, we'd be moving
Yeah, yeah,
beyond them being a man who likes men into a man who wants to become a woman.
exactly. And if you grow up like plenty of little girls go through a tomboy phase, and now it's like, oh, you're obvious you want to be a boy, don't you? Maybe we should give
Right.
you
And
hormones.
there's kind of a flip side of it. In the '80s, there were a number of women who kind of had some masculine features. I'm thinking Annie Lennox and Grace Jones, but were
Yeah,
really hot. I mean, they became certainly Grace Jones became an icon for gay men. But as a straight
right.
man, I always thought that she was extraordinarily attractive.
She was well put together. She's not my type, but I'll say she was built well.
Well, she
She
started
was
off
well
as
put
a
together.
fashion model before
Yeah,
singing.
yeah, sure,
Uh,
sure.
Right, but I mean,
I mean,
obviously, with the short hair and the kind of bony, structure,
yeah,
those are kind of not considered real feminine. But uh,
Right.
Right, and Annie Lennox even more so because I don't think she had any like big fan base among gays and
No.
lesbians, whereas Grace Jones had a huge fan among base among both.
Right. The Eurythmics were pretty mainstream. Like they were new wave. They came out of the new wave scene, but they were pretty.
Right, but she had the short hair, and she her build was not she didn't have the huge tits.
Yeah, she wore men's suits.
Right, but all that the short hair and the men's suits kind of like made it like in some way more attractive to heterosexual men. I can't really explain it.
It's sort of a kink, right? It's sort of like it's a kink or a fetish, or maybe that's making it sound too.
Yeah. They kind of like like it's transvestitism or something. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, she was. I mean, she would have been pretty. I think if she had tried, if she had been,
I still
if she had
thought she
grown her
was
hair
hot.
out. Yeah, yeah. I always thought, I wish she would grow her hair out, and it kind of annoyed me, even though I like the song "Sweet Dreams." I like the song and the video, and it's of course iconic. Um, but but yeah, so that stuff was out there in the popular culture, and like, but it didn't. It somehow Boy George and Annie Lennox could could exist as icons of the Western musical world, and they didn't, like in the Soviet Union, they didn't like feel a revulsion toward it, or they didn't feel like, oh, our morals are threatened by this.
Well, there was controversy over Boy George wearing the dress at the time. Culture Club was having its hit, so it wasn't as there was nobody. But
Yeah,
again,
sure.
a guy wearing a dress is like so mild compared to a guy becomes a woman that you're like,
Yeah.
okay, it's like with retrospect, it doesn't seem extreme, but there was the idea of the slippery slope always being right. That is, if you
Yeah.
start having guys wearing dresses, the next thing they're going to do is they're just going to become women.
It makes me think of the character, the sheriff character, No Country for Old Men. Have you ever seen that? Or I guess it was a book also.
No, I haven't.
With Tommy Lee Jones, this old school
Isn't
sheriff,
that,
and
based on a McCormick novel?
yes, it's very grim, it's very bleak. But the like this sheriff played by Tommy Lee Jones says something like, it was, when they stop saying sir and ma'am, it's just all downhill from there. Next thing you know, they got purple hair, like something like that. It was like, for him, it came down to the sir and ma'am, sir and ma'am being omitted from when young people were addressing their
But that
elders.
movie, something in the '80s, had great movies, particularly popular movies, not the art stuff that.
Yeah, well, sure. There was the Star Wars original trilogy.
The first one was in the '70s, but yeah, the Empire Strikes Back was in the '80s, as was Return of the Jedi.
Right.
And then you had
Spielberg
Indiana
movies.
Jones.
Yeah.
And you had
Ghostbusters.
Yeah, Ghostbusters. You had a lot of these kind of summer hits that were, again, they're aiming for entertainment. It doesn't seem to. I mean, what is the kind of political message of Ghostbusters? Right? Don't let the demon out, or it'll destroy New York City. I mean, that's not a political message, really.
Well, they do. It's like maybe kind of a little like libertarian almost, because like the main bad guy is this bureaucrat. The like this really infuriating.
That was common though in the '80s to have government and giant corporations, all these things that the left loves today. They attack them incessantly in '80s films.
I know, they were authority figures. Of course. So I mean, you wanted to hate on authority and make fun of authority figures. That's that establishes your cred. And yeah, it is weird that today like the left, at least the like the neoliberal, like the mainstream left is all about big corporations and it's like they've
And the
embraced
CIA
authority.
turning Muslims gay.
Yeah, and they like the CIA. I mean, they're like, what do you? I just sometimes am flabbergasted at like where are like the good that the left represented in the 80s was how they pointed out the corruption of groups like the CIA and stuff they were
Right.
doing and
The institutions, yes.
yeah, that
Yeah,
was
I don't know what
admirable.
happened because I'm past to where I kind of like missed, where the change was. But I remember in high school, I had a couple of ex-hippie guys, and looking back, they were pretty good teachers. They talked about is
Yeah,
like it's not that. In fact, everything they said about the CIA was true, and they did some things worse. But the one thing they didn't kind of like bring up, because they always kind of made a moral equivalency, was the KGB, which I would
yeah,
say, insofar as it goes, is correct. But the one step further is that the CIA was both evil and stupid. At least the KGB has had some of these older Russian guys that were not stupid. Some of these had
yeah,
some principles left.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's seeming that way. It's not what I would have thought, back in the day, but it's seeming that way now. There's
Well,
just
there is one saying. I think it was almost accurate. It said everything Soviet propaganda said about the U.S. was true, and everything they said about themselves was a lie, and everything American propaganda said about the Soviet Union was true, and everything they said about themselves was a lie.
yeah, there's yeah, absolutely. Like there's truth to that. Like I mean, it's in your interest, I guess, to point out what's bad about the bad guys, and it helps if what you're saying is actually true about the if you're locked in a Cold War or like a propaganda
I think
war.
one of my favorite movies from the '80s, which is very Cold War, is White Nights with
Yeah,
Baryshnikov and Hines.
very hard. Yeah,
Did you see
I
that
never
movie?
saw that. No,
Oh,
never
you
saw it.
should. It's excellent. Well, Hines is one of these kind of self-deluded Black Americans that think life will be better in the Soviet Union because it's socialist. And he goes
Oh,
there with his
really?
wife, and he finds it's absolutely horrible because they're far more racist than the American Southerners.
That's interesting.
But Baryshnikov, right? He defects, and he's on a plane, and it had forced to go down and land in the Soviet Union. So the first thing you see, he's in the plane toilet trying to destroy his passport. So that at least it'll take him a while to figure out who the hell he is, right?
Mm. Uh-huh. Interesting. And he
But
was it
they get thrown together in this kind of like exile village and figure out a way to escape.
okay. That's what it's about. And Baryshnikov was interesting because he was like a ballet dancer, but he was totally straight, right?
Yes, he was not only was he totally straight, he was also he was Russian on his father's side and Latvian on his mother's side. And so, as you know, the Baltic peoples, the Latvians and Lithuanians, don't particularly like the Russians for historical reasons.
Yeah, right.
So he always had that. I mean, part of it because his mother was Latvian, not Russian.
Mm.
And like what the movie with Sean Connery, the submarine captain. Uh,
Yeah, I was thinking about that one earlier.
yeah,
The
well, he's Lithuanian, obviously, and they're
Hunt
pissed
for
off
Red
about being
October.
occupied.
The Hunt for Red October, which was a
Hunt
Tom
for Red
Clancy.
October, right? Yeah. So the submarine captain is the Lithuanian in that.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Um, yeah, it's wild to think back on now.
Yeah, but it's one of
Um,
my favorite Cold War movies. It's very well done. Baryshnikov After he was too old to do ballet, he turned out to be quite a talented actor, and he learned, unlike some foreigners, to get English without too much of an accent. I mean, Arnold
Okay.
Schwarzenegger never seemed to get rid of the Austrian accent.
Right. That's right. But that's now that you're bringing up Arnold. I mean, the action movies of the '80s also were, like Rambo or uh,
Predator,
Predator,
Terminator.
The Terminator um, movies, the early Terminator movies. That also represented part of the whole pop
Yeah,
culture.
well, the first Terminator was great because the protagonist was the bad guy.
Yeah,
I don't even think they meant to do it, but the way it was kind of inevitable, the way that they cast it, that would happen.
you're talking about Arnold, right?
Yeah, but he
Yeah,
wasn't the good guy in the original Terminator. He was the villain.
yeah, I know, I know, I remember that. I loved him as the villain. I thought
Oh, he was
he
great.
was he was
But
strangely.
I think that though that the producer, the director, thought that people were gonna like cheer against Arnold just because he was the villain, and not realizing how charismatic he was.
Yeah,
That everyone said, "Oh no, the bad guy! We want the bad guy to win."
yeah, I know. Well, it was like he had this appeal, like he was tough. Even though he didn't know, he was like a stranger in a strange land. And he was this machine. He didn't know anything or anybody. He just had this mission that to kill Sarah Connor, and he just was not going to let anything get in his way. He was just going to go right. He was like going to kill whoever he needed to kill and do whatever he had to do, and he just kept coming back over and over and over again. And it's pretty,
That's very 80s too.
yeah, it's pretty
Like
compelling. And
what's the movie with Die Hard with Bruce Willis?
yeah, right. A Christmas movie, some say.
It is a Christmas movie.
And we're coming up on Christmas, so that's an interesting, like interesting thing. Like some film geeks file it as a Christmas, as a Christmas movie, or a movie with Christmas themes. Oddly enough, given that it's really just this action, the shoot 'em up action movie.
But a very
But
entertaining one.
yes, absolutely. Bruce Willis, Stallone, Arnold Schwarzenegger, like all those guys, like in the '80s, they could just be as toxically masculine as, or what would today be called toxically masculine, and nobody cared. Everybody loved it. Now, what? Maybe to conclude our discussion, maybe I'm going to run this by you. Maybe this is a good way for us to end our conversation for tonight.
Okay.
But my I published something recently, just like a short work. You can find it on my Substack page, and it's also available for like a dollar on Kindle.
And it'll
And
go up to be worth like $1 million the day after you die.
absolutely, I'm sure, like all of my work will. But the premise of it is I'm considering the cultural changes that have taken place, and something that I can't help but note, looking back in retrospect, is that it wasn't until the end of the Cold War that political correctness or wokeness really started up in earnest. Like during the
It's true.
'80s, there was no real political. I mean, there was like on college campuses. It was going
Even
on
then,
there.
it's only in the late 80s, which is the kind of the beginning of the end of the Cold War, because Gorbachev is removing the restrictions in the Soviet Union, and there's negotiations with Reagan and Gorbachev basically to end the Cold War by ending the Warsaw Pact
Right.
NATO still exists, unfortunately, but we got rid
Yeah.
of one organization.
Well, my thesis is that, like, and if you watch TV shows at the time, like, there was no problem with having families, like white families who stayed together and wholesome, commercials were just like, there were no gay couples in commercials. There were no mixed race couples in commercials. Uh, it was very, a show could be as white as white can be, like as far as casting goes, and nobody cared. Nobody complained about it.
Right, even like shows that had left wing politics, like Roseanne. Everybody was white in Roseanne, even though it was kind of a left wing working class type show.
Yeah, I never watched Roseanne, although I know.
It wasn't bad,
Right.
So is that kind of like the turning point? Because that was kind of still the old pro-union, anti-CIA, anti-corporate, working class 1960s leftism, but there's almost nothing on in the early Roseanne on racial and sexual minorities. Although later on they start to do that, but originally it's just white working class people trying to live.
Yeah.
I think another show that was like that, although they kind of had to do it historically throwback, was that 70s show. Everybody there was white.
Well, that wasn't until the 90s. Yeah, and in the 90s there were still a few shows like Friends, of course, which has gotten more attention lately because of Matthew Perry's death. That's gotten lambasted recently for being all white, but at the time when it was out, like there was no real problem with it. But I mean, you started to hear in the 90s, you started to hear stuff about the white male, white males dominating everything, and like there was the movie Dances with Wolves, which showed the white man in a very negative light, and like you started to see anti-white stuff and anti-male stuff and feminist stuff like really getting pushed hard, or harder.
Really the late 80s, early 90s this starts.
Yeah, after the Cold War ended. So my thesis is, that amongst the, let's say the groups who have a lot of power and control in the West and in the United States
Not
in
you
general.
and
me. Yeah, right. That people that while the Cold War was still going on, they wanted the the white, the not necessarily all white, but just they wanted normal people, normal Americans on their side, because they were in this titanic struggle for for dominance and control of the world, possibly, with the Soviet bloc. So as a result, the entertainment and everything, commercials and everything, they didn't go there. They didn't let it. They didn't let feminism and gay rights. I mean, it was and like anti-white rhetoric. It was around, but they didn't just. They didn't.
I think especially for the Democratic Party. There used to be kind of a solid base of white working class, factory workers and that were unionized, right? But these people were not. These people were not self-hating whites, and they were not, homosexuals.
They were church-going. A lot of them, like in the rural,
a lot of them were church-going as well. But I think it's just that that there was still this kind of core socially conservative, even if economically, because as I said, a lot of these guys are factory workers and unions. They're more center left, but on the social issues, they tended to be quite conservative. A lot of them.
Yes, right. Yeah, and like the remnant of that is like the Appalachian world today.
Yeah,
You
except
know,
they're not working in factories, so because they're not working, they're not members of the union. So it's not really it's dysfunctional. And I'm not
yeah,
saying that everybody's unemployed, but there's a lot more unemployment in Appalachia and a lot more
yeah,
drug use
yeah,
than there was in the U.S. as a whole in the '80s. So I mean, when we're talking about
yeah,
the white working class, because I'm sure you remember, it used to be all the way up until the period of time we're talking about, like the late '80s. But starting in the 1950s, you could be like have a high school diploma, go to work in a factory, join the labor union, and support your wife who didn't work, 3 kids,
yeah,
have a house, and have a car.
yeah. I know that, like, with wages with respect to the standard of living or the price of living were more in harmony than they are today. You know,
Right. 'Cause I don't think, I think the corporations have tried to set it up where you need two workers to support a family so they can get
absolutely.
twice as
Well,
much
and
labor for the same salary.
that's why the CIA supported feminism. Gloria Steinem was a CIA,
That's true.
asset,
The
and
CIA supports lots of stuff. They also supported modern art. Jackson Pollock was paid off by
yes,
the CIA.
I know. Um, I know it's wild.
You know, it's something
So
interesting though, because Khrushchev denounced modern art, and I think which is what led the CIA to fund it. But
right,
if you look at Soviet art from the Khrushchev era, it's supposedly socialist realist, but it's really just realist. So it's just basically paintings of people out on farms having
yeah,
picnics, right? But it's basically what existed in every other country in the world in the 19th century. And this
yeah,
was considered, to be some sort of horrible reactionary art
yeah,
compared to splatter paint. And I'm thinking, well, the Soviet stuff
yeah,
from the 1950s doesn't look any different than the U.S. stuff from the 1850s.
yeah. Well, that's a point. There's a point there to be made. Yes, for sure.
Well, the art museum in Bishkek, Kyrgyzstan, has a lot of these rural paintings from collective farms during the Khrushchev era, and they're basically just like normal farmers going out and having picnics or fishing in the nearby stream or these types of kind of rural bucolic. And it's called socialist realism, but it might as well just be called realism because that's basically what it is.
Yeah, yeah. Right. I mean, I think the Soviet Union, as I understand it, in the early days, like embraced avant-garde
They did
stuff.
in the 20s, and it was a lot of bad stuff.
But then, when Stalin took over, it was like a reestablishment of the old order in a lot of ways, or aesthetically
Yeah, it was
speaking.
a move back. Yeah, so he outlawed male homosexuality.
Yeah.
He outlawed common law marriage.
Hmm.
Uh, he rolled back what was called Korenizatsiya, which was basically the affirmative action program for non-Russians.
Uh-huh. Interesting. And the whole socialism in one country thing was like that was a definite uh, flip
Well,
flop from.
because the socialism in every country thing almost led to the end of the Soviet Union in 1927. So they
Right,
almost went to war with Great Britain at that time because they were supporting the idea of
right,
having a general strike. It never got off the ground. But
yeah,
more importantly, in China, there was an uprising in Shanghai by the communists. And the
hmm,
Kuomintang, this is one of their probably most brilliant moves, their soldiers uh, had a penchant for being corrupt. So what Cheng did was he contracted out with a guy named Big Du, who's actually a relative of one of my colleagues when I was in Kyrgyzstan. But Big
oh,
Du was the criminal boss in Shanghai, ran the prostitution, and gambling, and opium. And his armed men, because obviously this is a serious mafia operation here,
yeah,
they just went to town killing the communists in the 27 uprising. I mean, so much so that everybody thought that communism was doomed in China. A couple of years later, Mao makes the long march into Yan'an. But the
Yeah.
assessment in Moscow was that Trotsky's idea of revolution everywhere, right, had just killed almost all of the communists in China.
Right. So it was a
So
practical. It
he
was a practical
lost support because that not working. You blew it,
Yeah.
man.
Yeah. Yeah. And speaking of China, it's interesting. Even though China is still nominally communist today, that they still have this interest in promoting moral uprightness and I don't know, just I remember hearing a story lately that actually this was maybe a couple of years ago that like K-pop bands, boy bands out of Korea had gotten banned on Chinese television because they were too effeminate and they want to promote.
They are. I've only been to Korea once, but
Mm-hmm.
there's even to me it was obvious because there used to be the kind of the icon of masculinity in South Korea was the Korean Marine, so the rocks, and
Right.
about 350,000 of these guys fought in Vietnam, and they were just feared by the Vietnamese because they were just so ruthless.
Mm-hmm.
So these guys were tough.
Right.
And now all the young Korean women, instead of going after these muscle-bound Marines who proved themselves to be hardcore fighters
Yeah.
in the jungles of Vietnam, they're all going after these androgynous, effeminate, boy
Yeah.
band singers. And it's like, what is wrong with these Korean women? How did it change? And of course, now Korea, nobody's getting married and having sex and having kids, so that might be the
Yeah.
reason.
Yeah. Well, and so it's an interesting thing where we see China, communist China, embracing still embracing these traditionalist values as far as promoting traditional masculinity, promoting traditional femininity.
There's a lot, though, following in the Stalinist era, the Mao, they had a couple of folk heroes created by the communists, guys that were doing incredible things. One, I can't remember.
Che Guevara.
No. These were Chinese guys.
Okay.
So one guy was, oh, but anyway, one guy was like a oil worker, and another guy was some sort of. But these were was a soldier, but he was involved in some sort of blue collar work. They did incredible feats. So these were models put up, but they're kind of like the socialist version of masculinity, right?
Yeah.
In the Soviet Union under Stalin and China under Mao is very much coming almost, I think, from Jack London, who was also a socialist. The kind of the socialist Superman, as it were.
Right.
Because, as I said, homosexuality was outlawed by Stalin. It was certainly illegal in China under Mao, where one of the groups that the Red Guards went after, in fact, were homosexuals.
It's probably. I'm guessing it may not be illegal today, but it's probably frowned upon still today. I'm guessing in China.
Yeah. I don't know what the laws are, and I haven't been to China. But when I went to Korea, right, this conference, there were all of these Asians. I don't know where they're originally from, but they were doing degrees in places like Oxford, and they had all of these papers on queerness and Chinese.
They'd all been corrupted by the West, by the institutions of the West.
I don't even know where that was coming from, but I mean, there was a disproportionate number. I mean, percentage-wise, the number of papers on queer Asians at the Asian the conference I went to in Seoul was far greater than the percentage of gay Asians that exist.
Yeah, right. um, and Korea is very much under Western sway.
Oh
South
yeah,
Korea is under very much under Western
right.
sway,
The Republic
and
of Korea.
I guess yeah, like South Korea, and I guess that Japan is too. Although Japan still seems a little more based today, but I don't know. That's just my
I think they
perception.
have more independence than Korea. They've had more time to kind of establish it because the Korea came under U.S. influence during the Korean War, which
Yeah,
was fought in Korea itself. So
yeah,
it was hard for South Korean leaders to kind of get away from that, especially since North Korea still exists and is a potential existential threat.
right.
Although it seems like what may happen is just everybody in South Korea will die off because nobody has sex anymore, and the North Koreans will just walk in.
Huh. Of course, that's the trend in a lot of industrialized countries, but I know it's more pronounced in South Korea.
They're, I think, the worst as far as actual fertility.
That's
Yeah.
interesting as far as
But
replacement rate
North
goes.
Korea is above replacement level. So the North Korean population is still growing. So as
Right.
bad as horrible as North Korea is, there's something particularly dystopian about South Korea that people don't want to have
Yeah.
sex and kids. And even in the Soviet Union or Stalin, this was there are a couple of pro-Stalinist revisionists would say, well, the terror couldn't have been that bad because people still went on picnics and people were still having sex. Look, the population's still growing. I don't think that ameliorates the terror, but the fact that you have dysfunctional capitalist states basically ceasing to reproduce themselves biologically, whereas this didn't happen in the worst of totalitarian regimes, I think says something. So there was still like a private sphere in the Soviet Union and China and even in North Korea, right? You could still like enjoy sex with your wife and you could still have kids and family, right? Evidently, South Koreans don't believe that anymore, unlike the North Koreans. So I don't know. I mean, it seemed fine when I was there, but people who've been there a long time tell me there's a lot of dystopianism, right? It looks nice on the outside, like every other, movie and novel, oh, it looks like a nice little country. It's rich, industrialized, clean, but there's something really dark going on. I mean, if all your women decide they don't want to have sex with all your men, that's a pretty serious problem.
Yeah, I'm wondering how Squid Game fits into all this. Did you ever watch that show, Squid Game?
I mean, I'm not an expert on Korea. My only really thing I do is I've written some on ethnic Koreans in the Soviet Union, but culturally, the ethnic Koreans in the Soviet Union are very Russified. In fact, in Central Asia, they refer to them as Europeans, like the Russians and Ukrainians, even though obviously physiognomy is Asian, but because they've embraced Russian culture to such a greater extent than the Kyrgyz and the Kazakhs and the Uzbeks.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So there we have it. I mean, that's just interesting. How things go, go in cycles or.
Well, I mean, that was kind of the 80s because, South Korea was poor until the 80s. And then, they had a huge growth during this time. And then the huge opening to places other than the U.S. alliance, most notably China and the USSR after the 88 Seoul Olympics. But maybe it was like one of these things that's like too much of a good thing, You're now rich. Okay, so we'll have feminism and we won't reproduce and we'll die off and the communists in the North will be proved right.
Yeah. I just thought that was wild to like. It's just part of the whole kind of realignment of everything. I mean, I don't endorse like I know that I know that Russia isn't perfect today, but it seems like it's what I would categorize maybe as an authoritarian uh, government rather than a totalitarian government. Whereas
Well, I
I
will
think
tell you, um, my only experience where I can like make a comparison is with regard to academic conferences.
right.
And I felt in Moscow that I had a lot more academic freedom than in the U.S.
Mm, interesting. That's so interesting. I mean, like the
And
who'd have
and,
thought?
and I was not like giving any pro-Russian paper. It was a conference on Kurds, and my paper was on how Stalin rounded up a bunch of them in Georgia and dumped them in Central Asia uh,
Yeah,
to die. But nobody from the Russian side had any problem with
yeah. You weren't
anything
canceled
I
by
said
the
or wrote.
you weren't canceled by the pro Stalinist types or whatever in
No,
Russia.
no,
Like,
it's not, this is a historical event that happened. We have to research it and analyze it, but it doesn't do any good to deny it.
yeah, yeah, and like they're like so looks can like things are things can be deceiving on the surface because on paper, you know, the United States is of course much more quote unquote free, but they if you get out of if you step out of line and say the wrong thing, you can absolutely be ruined. Um, and
Right, and some of the ruination is very Soviet. So one of
yeah,
the guys I have met and known, and I he I knew his wife when she was married to another guy. They were Estonians, but then she got divorced from him and married this guy who was never left Estonia. So his name is Tuna Kalam. But I met him in person when I went to Estonia as part of my research for my PhD in 2003, I think. Yeah. And he was, during the Soviet era, an editor for the academic encyclopedia for the Estonian Soviet Socialist Republic.
mm-hmm,
And one of the guarantees for non-Russians, if living in their own republics, is the right to use their own language in all aspects, right? Well,
right,
he tried ordering train tickets in Estonian rather than Russian, and they said, "No, use Russian." He said, "No, I'm in Estonia, and I'm in Estonian. I'm going to use my constitutional right to use my native language." And he got in trouble. But the way he got in trouble is the way we all get in trouble. They sacked him from his job as an encyclopedia editor and
right,
made him work as a night watchman at a chicken coop.
right.
And he said that the conditions the chickens were under was so horrible that he never ate meat again. He became a strict vegetarian.
Wow.
Right?
I bet
So
they
they
were
didn't arrest
horrible.
him. They didn't. But they sacked him from his academic job and made him work a menial labor job, which I can greatly relate to.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. That's how it's done now in the West. Like you said, it's done by proxy. Um, uh, more than it's done. It's like they call it soft totalitarianism. To me, it doesn't seem that soft. I mean, but
Well,
it
I
is.
suppose that the alternative is they send us to a labor camp north of the Arctic Circle for 25
Yeah,
years, and we find coal.
yeah. The alternative is they come knocking on your door at 2 in the morning and drag you away,
Well, hasn't the
and
FBI knocked on your door once?
they did. They sure did. Yeah, they did.
They haven't
They
knocked
were.
on my door.
They did. They were. They were. You know. They were playing. They were nice, or they acted nice, but there was nothing nice about. There's nothing nice about being visited by the FBI. That's just a
I
That's
would
just a given. So
haven't
yeah,
had any
absolutely.
run-ins with it, though I am convinced that my neighbor in Iraq was killed by the CIA. So you can look him up. His name was Peter Choi, but he quote unquote the day before he was going to go back to California fell out of an 8th floor window and hit his head on the concrete below, killing him. Uh,
Uh,
but I lived in the apartment below him, and we have very high railings on the balcony there.
right.
And the autopsy didn't show any alcohol or any other mind-altering substances. So the only
Uh,
way to like go over that is somebody like throws you or pushes you or you deliberately jump. And I don't think he committed suicide.
he didn't seem depressed or suicidal to you.
He seemed very happy. He was going back to California after working for years in Iraq. He was going to go work on a winery that his brother and a friend had purchased. So they were going to do a small winery in the Sonoma Valley.
And what had he done to
That I don't
get?
know, but he must have known something.
Huh. Huh.
But you can look it up.
That's,
His last name is Choi, Choi, a Korean
uh,
name, and his first name is Peter. So look up Peter Choi and AUIS or Peter Choi in Iraq, and you'll get the stories of his death. But it doesn't make any sense. It's like guy accidentally falls through a window and dies. People don't
yeah,
accidentally fall through windows. People are thrown through windows.
absolutely, absolutely. No, I mean, I don't know anything about the case, but I believe it. I
Well,
mean,
we'll
I'm
look it up. I mean, you're not going to find anything other than the obituary. But when you read through it and they kind of give a description of what supposedly happened, it doesn't make any sense.
yeah, I hear you.
But he did fall from 8 floors and die, so something happened.
Yeah, yeah, that's scary stuff. So they haven't done that to me yet. So I mean, I guess I should be thankful. As far
Yeah.
as I mean, I don't think I'm enough of a burr in their saddle to. I'm too small scale. Too
Yeah, I'm too small scale too. But
How is your book doing, by the way?
the as far as sales,
Yeah,
well, it's in 600 and I think 19 libraries now worldwide, and I don't know how many private sales, although I
that's great.
suspect less. Um, some countries it's done really well in as far as libraries. Germany, obviously, because I know some people there. They've managed to get it in all of the small specialty libraries that deal with the fate of Germans under communist rule mostly
Yeah,
after World War II, but obviously during and before, as my book notes. But
right.
some places are kind of surprising, like it's in every university library in South Africa.
That's interesting. Yeah, well, why would they be? Why would they
I
be?
think I have some followers among the Afrikaner community in Twitter that like the book, and so
Oh,
we're able to use their contacts to get it purchased. I mean, you only need to send an email, but if you're a
yeah,
librarian at a university, you get an email from somebody you know, you probably will go and acquire the book when you get the next budget.
that's interesting. Well, that sounds really exciting to have your book in those like I guess it's the kind of book like it's very fact oriented and history oriented and so it's the sort of thing that libraries would want to have on file, like talking about important historical records that need to be preserved, or else they'll be
Well, there's
forgotten.
also the money issue. For an academic book, it's quite cheap at $42. But I found that like a lot of people, they just like have like a mental block of paying more than $20 for a book, which is in the near future going to mean they're not going to buy anything that's not used.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh gosh, the price of everything. Like it's getting back
Uh,
to what we were
but for a
originally talking about.
library, since most like in the U.S., the public libraries are mostly county budget. from
Yeah.
property taxes and lodging taxes and that type of thing, right? It's not that issue because I mean the money's already allocated, so
Yeah.
they don't have a kind of this. Well, a book should only be $20. A book is $42. Is $42.
Yeah. Yeah. For sure. Um.
You don't have that problem because your books are all cheap, right?
Well, they're cheaper than that. Yeah. But they're not, as far as I know, they're not in any libraries anywhere. So you
You
got
should
that
have
on there.
people write because if a library gets an email from a local patron or a
Yeah.
university library gets an email from a professor, they will generally go and acquire the book.
Yeah. That's true. That's true. Um. So. Uh. So um my latest book that hasn't been published yet, but is supposed to be published in December or January. I'm told.
Like Terror
It's
House
called like what is
Terror,
what?
is Terror House the publisher?
Terror House. Yes, Terror House will be my publisher again, and it's called
That's Matt Forney, right?
exactly. Matt Forney is the editor in
Is he
chief.
still in Mexico?
I believe so. I don't know that much about his whereabouts.
He
He
kept
kind of keeps a
moving.
low profile,
He keeps moving.
but he does. Yeah, yeah, he does. But he doesn't give out that much information about where he
I
is.
just want to know the country.
Yeah, it's Mexico, and I believe it's Guadalajara, if I'm remembering right.
Oh, Guadalajara won't do. That's from an old Steely Dan song.
Okay, there you go. Um, it's going to be
You write a
about the
book
last.
about some guys who grew up in the '80s and like can't adjust. Maybe a guy who goes overseas for a dozen years or so and comes back to America and it's like 1,000 times more difficult to integrate than it was to
Yeah,
blend into Africa, even though he's a white guy.
that sounds like a book. Sounds like a book you should write because that's the
Maybe.
one.
I've had requests for. I'm not sure how many copies it would sell though.
Hmm. Well, you'd have to
It's not
spice it up a
politically
little.
correct or woke. Middle-aged white guy.
I know. Um,
Middle-aged white guy
uh,
goes to non-white countries.
yeah, right. Um, but my new book is about the last ever presidential election. Um, and so it's sort of like
That would have been the
what
one when Trump was elected.
maybe. Well, I mean the last one for real.
2016.
Yeah, not like the last one before before there's massive fraud in the next one, but I mean the last one that is even ever held at all. So it's written with an eye towards the I'm looking. I'm already. I guess we're a year away from election day, and I'm already just not looking forward to the
Oh, by the
long.
way, two of my friends are running for mayor. One of them got kind of an odd guy. I don't think he has a chance. But the other guy is a German immigrant. And it's kind of
Uh-huh.
interesting. Uh, he's a geologist, but nobody has brought this up, but both his mother and his grandfather joined the Nazi Party. They did so for completely opportunistic reasons, and they were like just
Right,
she was a school teacher and he was a railroad worker, right?
right.
But I'm surprised nobody's brought this up, and maybe it's just because he's been so honest about it, because nobody
Yeah,
would have known if he hadn't like brought up the story of his grandfather and his mother's denazification process after World War II. But I'm thinking, like, if it was in New York City or Los Angeles, it'd be like, son of
oh,
Nazi running for mayor. That's all you would hear.
yeah, yeah, for sure. Um, uh, Now, how much what do you think about like the whole notion that Operation Paperclip went way beyond where like I know there's some theorizing that there are still ideologized Nazis
I
who
don't think
have
any of those guys were real ideological national socialists. I think they joined the party for a variety of reasons, but I mean, Werner von Braun and Arthur
right.
Rudolph are not Heinrich Himmler and uh,
Uh-huh.
Joseph Goebbels, right?
Yeah, right.
They were primarily scientists. They probably were German nationalists, but they probably would have been fine with with a German nationalist party that was less aggressive and less anti-Semitic than the National
Yeah,
Socialists. But the National
right.
Socialists are the ones that were appointed. Hitler was appointed chancellor by Hindenburg in 1933. So I mean that's the party
Yeah,
you got to join if you want to move up. But I don't
absolutely.
think they were really strong on the National Socialism, or at least not the parts that most people found offensive. I mean, the whole thing is they used the projects used forced labor. But I mean,
Right.
how many projects did the Allies have that used forced labor? I mean, the
Oh yeah.
the subway in Moscow is absolutely beautiful. It's like a series of art galleries. It was
Yeah.
built by under the auspices of Lazar Kaganovich using forced labor, Gulag
Yeah.
prisoners, German prisoners of war. Right, it was not built with free labor, but it's a beautiful work. I would never say tear it down because it was built by essentially slaves.
Yeah. That's just to me one of the weird things about the Ukraine war is how Ukraine is so it's so infused with these Nazi groups, you know.
Yeah, but those groups were not. I think I brought this up, but the UNB under Bandera and his brother, as well as the UPA, their armed wing they founded, and also I guess we could throw Yaroslav Stetsko in there. Is they were not trusted by the German National Socialists because their own brand of Ukrainian racism was so extreme that the Erich Cox, who was the Gauleiter for East Prussia, he became the
Right.
Reichskommissar from Ukraine, didn't trust them. And part of this was just anti-Slavic racism, but part of it was that the Ukrainians wanted a purely Ukrainian state, and they said they supported the extermination of the UNB, Yaroslav Stetsko in particular.
So
They
they
wanted the
out Nazi the
extermination of the
Nazis.
Jews and the Poles. They had the ethnic
Yeah.
cleansing of Poles in Volhynia and Galicia in 1943. I think the Germans were very worried that, well, there's still 300,000 ethnic Germans in Ukraine. What are these crazy people going
Yeah.
to do? So
Right.
Bandera spent most of the war from 41 to 43 in Sachsenhausen concentration camp, along with his brother, because the Germans thought they were too extreme.
So they out Nazi the Nazis.
In some sense,
In
this
some,
happened in Croatia too, with
yeah.
Ustasha and Deha. Germans reported that the Croatians were taking too much pleasure in the removal of Untermenschen.
They were taking too much.
So it was like it's sadistic types of
Uh-huh.
personal killing with knives and axes going on at
Yeah.
Jasanovac, whereas a place
Sort of
like
clean
Treblinka.
antiseptic sort of
Yes, yes. I mean, that was the whole thing of Eichmann,
yeah.
talking about the banality of evil, but it's also why they moved from the Einsatzgruppen shootings to the gas chambers was
Uh,
to make this a more efficient and humane, kind of like killing rats, right? You want to get rid of the rats, but you don't want to necessarily make them suffer because they're just rats, right? That was
yeah, well, and they were
kind of the attitude, whereas
Yeah.
The Slavic groups, the Croatians, the Ukrainians, it's like real personal hatred, right? I'm going to
Yeah.
make these guys suffer one by one.
Torture them and
Yeah,
whatnot.
there was a lot of that in Jasanovic in Croatia, in the NDH.
Yeah.
So yeah, that is there, but I think those roots are to the Ukrainian, what they
Right.
call integral nationalist. They didn't use the term national socialist,
Hmm.
and they came before the national socialist came to power. So the UN was basically the Ukrainian PLO engaging in terrorist activities against Poland during the 1920s and 30s.
I see. Yeah, it's just interesting that today, you have the CIA backing Nazis in Ukraine, just like they backed,
Well, we
ISIS
had
and
that earlier, except they
Al
were in
Qaeda in
exile. So
Syria.
Yaroslav Stetsko was head of the Ukrainian organization within the Anti-Bolshevik League of Nations, which was originally set up, I think, by MI6 and then taken over by CIA. But this is another thing that Yaroslav Stetsko, his racial theories got so crazy. So he started talking about the Russians not being European. Now, the Russians were really just Mongolian Asians, right?
Right, right.
And that was why they were racially inferior, because they're all Asiatic and not European. So this became an embarrassment to have, because he also supported exterminating all the Jews in Ukraine. So
Right.
they handed it over to the intelligence services of the Republic of China in Taiwan and South Korea. So Chiang Ching-kuo and the son of Chiang Kai-shek, and in Korea, I think at the time they did this, Park Chung-hee was still alive. He hadn't been assassinated yet. But they had to really change their propaganda, because all this the reason the Russians are so evil and despotic and
Yeah.
repressive is because they're Asians. That wasn't going to fly with the Korean CIA and whatever the Gomindang intelligence service was.
Yeah. Yeah, that's just like one of those things that came to my notice. And I'm a novice. I'm much more of a novice of all of this than you are, of course. On the just observing the
there
world
is
scene.
there is some slight kernel of truth to the kind of leftist theory, and there was a book about this in the 80s called Blowback, that the CIA did take over and support a number of anti-communist organizations from Eastern and Central Europe that had, from 43 on, basically been under the National Socialist umbrella, if not earlier, but certainly from 43 to 45. So this included the Ukrainians and the Lithuanians and the Latvians and the Estonians and the Croatians and all these groups, Romanians. But, as I said, they're kind of, if you want to call it fascism, integral nationalism was the term that was used in the 20s, has its own roots. And they just kind of ended up allying with the Germans because they were the ones fighting against their enemies, particularly the USSR. So there is a little bit of that. But again, none of these groups, even Stetsko, were advocating, a return to a Fourth Reich. And the Ukrainian organization in the ABN may have been the worst one with Stetsko, as far as having this kind of racialized hatred still. I don't think you saw that in the Baltic organizations, Lithuanian and Latvians and Estonians. I don't think you really saw it in the Croatians either, even though they had the links to the old NDH. I think there was kind of a movement away, particularly after 1972 with the Croatian Spring. In Croatia itself, the main leaders were former partisans who had fought against the NDH, was Tito. And so it kind of becomes a rehabilitation, as it were, of the Croatian communists as being nationalists when Yugoslavia falls apart. And so while there's some symbolism of the NDH, some kind of memorials to the regime, right? The man who established independent Croatia, Franjo Tudjman, was a general who fought with Tito's partisan against the NDH. So it was really the Croatian republic within socialist Yugoslavia that's the basis for modern Croatia.
Right. Right. It gets very
So
complicated.
Ukraine is kind of an odd man out because even when you talk about, for instance, tearing down the soldiers' monument in Estonia, or the Latvian and Estonian legions, which were Waffen SS units that fought against, they're not on the same level. I mean, already at Nuremberg, the Americans and the British said, we can't find any evidence that the Estonian or Latvian Waffen SS legions were anything other than combat units, as opposed to
Right.
a lot of other SS units which were just deemed to be criminal organizations.
Yeah. Well, interesting stuff. But I mean, it's just like strange bedfellows as always. But I think the CIA is completely unscrupulous. So
This is absolutely true. They don't really care. I mean, which is why we get things like the CIA and MI6 supporting the Khmer Rouge, the most radical of all communists, against the Vietnamese in the 1980s.
Oh, I didn't even know they supported the Khmer Rouge.
Yeah. So in 1978, on Christmas Day, the Vietnamese finally get fed up with Khmer Rouge soldiers crossing the border into Vietnam and slaughtering lots of people. Kind of like October 7th with Hamas.
Right.
But the Vietnamese, they don't hesitate. They clear out the Khmer Rouge and push them to the border with Thailand. And then because this was a Chinese client state, the Chinese invade northern Vietnam to punish Vietnam, and they lose more men in 3 months than we lost in 9 years.
Yeah.
And the Vietnamese push them back. But then there's this basically Vietnam, and Cambodia for the entire decade of the 80s, where China, the United States, Great Britain, ASEAN are supporting guerrilla groups in Cambodia. But most of those guerrillas and most of the leadership is the Khmer Rouge, still under Pol Pot, against the Vietnamese puppet government.
Oh, interesting. So that's why the dead Kennedys were okay singing their song against Pol Pot and Holiday in Cambodia, because it was CIA, because they were.
I don't know. I mean, the Khmer Rouge were militantly against the CIA. They tortured lots of people for being simultaneously CIA, KGB, and Vietnamese spies.
Yeah.
But after the Khmer Rouge were removed from power and pushed into the borders with Thailand, then the United States under Brzezinski said we'll cooperate with the Chinese and the Thais to support the Khmer Rouge to bog down the Vietnamese in Cambodia, because the Vietnamese, having been eternal enemies with the Chinese, right, threw their lot in with the only power that was going to help them,
right,
and that was the Soviet Union.
Right. The global chessboard. Yeah.
In some senses. But I mean, it's all very cynical. So you get Brzezinski saying, we could never support Pol Pot. He was a monster. But we could encourage the Chinese to do so. But of course, that was a lie, because we did give quite a bit of direct aid to the Khmer Rouge during the Reagan administration.
Yeah. Of course they lie. Of course they lie through their teeth all the time without any seeming remorse. It's just the way they are. They're made of different stuff. I mean, not just the CIA, but all reptilians, as it were. I'm not saying reptilian.
The Vietnamese war in Cambodia is one is kind of fascinating, because the Americans kind of totally lost interest in that region of the world after Saigon fell in 1975. But
Right.
for people living in the region, the war didn't end. The Vietnamese then, of course, had a 10-year war in Cambodia.
Right.
But that again was the 80s, so. You there? Oh no, I lost him again. We need to be wrapping this up soon, so hopefully he'll come back on and we can wrap this up. But a freeze frame, a song by Jay Giles Band. All right. Well,
Hey, can you
yes,
hear me now?
Joe Biafra and Henry Rollins are both annoying. Oh, you're there back.
Yeah.
Hello?
So, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can. So we should probably be wrapping this up, but this
Yeah,
is
let's
a
wrap this up.
fascinating discussion.
Yeah, it's been very interesting. Are there any comments or questions out there from anybody, or not?
People talking about how Jello Biafra and Henry Rollins are very annoying, but that's not controversial.
That's true. Everybody would agree with that.
I don't think anybody disagrees with that.
No.
Yeah, I was never liked much punk. The only punk band I could ever stand listening to was The Clash.
Oh well, I like the Sex Pistols. I still am a
I
fan of
never
the Sex Pistols.
particularly liked the Sex Pistols, but I certainly wasn't a fan of either the Dead Kennedys or Black Flag.
The California scene, as it were.
Yeah.
California punk scene.
No,
I think the Dead Kennedys were kind of amusing in the '80s, but yeah, I mean, from everything I've heard about Jello Biafra, he seems like a fairly tiresome person. But they had some funny, like they had some songs that were kind of funny, like California Uber Alles is kind of amusing.
Yeah, it's about Jerry Brown.
It's about Jerry Brown, yeah. So anyway, yeah, let's call this quits before. Things were going well. Things were moving along swimmingly there, and then started crapping out again.
Right, and maybe in the future, 40 years from now, there'll be a podcast by some middle-aged guys talking about the 2020s and referencing Poll in the wiki.
I'm sure there will be. I'm sure that, and I hope I live to see it.
Well, it's unlikely. 40 more years?
I know.
Well, you could.
I know.
It's possible.
It's possible, but it's not like
that either of us are going to be alive necessarily in 40 years.
Yeah, you're probably right.
I would like it to be, but you know what? I'm also not going to sweat too much about it because we all have to die sometime.
Yeah.
At this point, I've done my major accomplishments.
Yeah, exactly. And there's more. There's something to look forward to after death. Hopefully, for those of us who believe in that kind of thing, and that brings up a whole different issue, different matter. So let's stop on that precipice.
Okay, well, great to talk to you, Andy. And yeah, you might try to see if you could get your people to write to libraries about acquiring your books, because I'm pretty sure my campaigning for people to do that resulted in a number of sales to libraries.
Okay. I'll look into that. I don't know if that will result in me getting significantly more readers, but
But it
No,
would
you
be
won't
cool
get
that
significantly more readers, but you might sell,
probably just sit,
another
they'll
500
probably just sit
copies.
on the shelf. They'll probably just sit on the shelf in the library. But but anyway, it would be cool to have it there.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's talk again soon.
All
It's good
right.
to
Thanks
talk
a
to you.
lot, Andy. I'll see you later. All right.
Bye.
Bye. Okay. In stream.